Hello, everyone. My name's Chelazon Leroux, or Leighton Bayet. I was born November 7th, 1999. I live in Saskatchewan currently. I grew up all over Saskatchewan, Dene First Nations. Moved around a lot with my parents because both of them were educators. And yeah, I had a lot of wild experiences in my time of being alive, 23 years old. My home communities I'll start with. So my mom's side is Fond du Lac First Nation, which is far, far northern Saskatchewan near Lake Athabasca. Well, it is on Lake Athabasca and is Treaty 8 territory. And my father's side of the family is Treaty 10 Buffalo River Dene Nation, which is northwest. So those are my communities that I come from. And growing up though, both my parents, since we moved so much, we're never really in our home community. So I always kind of felt disconnected from that identity of being First Nations. And I'll tell this story really quickly here. It's funny to me. So the way I found out I was Native. So when I was in grade 1 or grade 2, we lived in Saskatoon, one of my earliest memories, right? And so we were at school there and it was Thanksgiving. So it was a Catholic school, and I guess they probably don't want to say too much when it's a group of kids, you know what I mean? But I remember I was just always very interested in learning about the world and hearing and paying attention and absorbing all this information. And the teacher was like, well, Thanksgiving's when, Native people and white people or settlers had dinner or like ate together. It's not the full truth. Now we know that today, but I guess when you're telling a group of grade 1 kids that you need to keep it PG. Anyways, I went back home, and my parents, since they're both educators, are always like, well, what did you learn today? And I was like, well, Thanksgiving's when the natives and white people had dinner. And my dad was really pissed off because he was like, you know what? No, that's not right. That's not the truth. My boy, you're Native. I was like, oh, that's cool. Interesting. So I learned something new about myself that day. I went back to school the next day and I'm just very excited to tell the classes. I was like, oh my God, you guys, guess what? I'm Native. And the first response I heard was, we should play Cowboys and Indians. So I scalped them right there. So that was, that's when I first found out that I was Dene First Nations at grade 2. That was like 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old.
And you were proud.
Yes, yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah. But that, that version of myself, that little kid is like, oh, cool, a new piece of identity. Just didn't realize there'd be a lot of ignorance even then. Maybe that should have been a warning about what it was going to be like. But yeah, I was. It was just really cool to learn now that I think back about it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Right on. So I guess tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into drag. Like how did you know that you were two-spirited? How did you become to that realization? And how did your family feel about that?
Right. So growing up as a young kid, okay, I was always I'm saying like probably like 3 to fucking 7 years old. I was always very like loud and creative. Like I always just like to play around and build stuff and tell stories and dress up in costumes, little Halloween costumes, and just create these stories in my head. And I was just having fun, but I could always see that even maybe it was my father, it was a look of disapproval, or my brothers teasing me. I was just shown that from the world that it was not okay to do that. And so I think I really started to close in on myself at that time as like a young kid becoming a teenager even. And it sucks because, one of the things I know, one of the teachings I had growing up is that children, when they, come to this world from the spirit world, it's just that they're closest with Creator. And they see things and they know things that we don't. You know what I mean? So, and to me, from what I got from that, or what I learned from that teaching, is that kids then are just acting out on what feels correct or what feels right to them.
It feels natural.
What feels natural, And I think it's just something that I felt was so fun and so authentic. And it's unfortunate that at that time, I said, I'm 23 now, but those 2000s, those years, I was shown that it wasn't okay to be feminine, or it wasn't okay to just be loud or like that, or the person that I wanted to be. So I had to, I don't want to say hide that, but I knew that it wasn't widely accepted. And so it's funny because I'm going to jump forward a bit, but I am now just becoming that kid again. I'm just doing what that kid wanted, to be happy. It was the rest of the world that said it wasn't okay, but I knew even then that these were the things that made me feel joy and made me feel seen, and to have now the world respond to that, it's something magical. But
Your true self.
coming true self, yeah.
Mm.
So it's unfortunate that that was seen as a negative thing. I think it's due to certain expectations of gender or religion, religious beliefs or whatever, but I don't know, it's just what felt right to me. And so growing up, it wasn't okay. I always kind of then became really quiet, which is not like me. I just observed and held to myself a lot of the time. And then talking about even just finding out that I was gay, right? So that's something that happened when I was probably 12, 13, realizing I'm not like everyone else. But even before that realization, it's unfortunate because we lived in Dillon, Saskatchewan at that time, finally having been back to a home community of mine. And even there, the homophobia, it was so bad. You know what I mean? It was like really judgmental, and I didn't understand it. And there'd be these boys that were older than me that would be like, oh, you're gay. Oh, you act so gay. And I didn't even know what that word meant.
Yeah.
You have the world telling you who you are before you even understand what it means. It's
Yeah.
interesting. So, it's something I've come to grow in my own experience and find out what it was. And I think it was 14 years old when I finally came out to my parents. They always knew
Yeah.
things were,
Parents
but
always know.
they always know. And, maybe it's better to just accept it and be like,
Yeah.
okay, or like at least make it feel safe. Don't have
Yeah.
to understand everything about it, but just to love, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm glad that when I opened up about it, it wasn't an issue, because I know it's not
Oh,
always the
that's good.
same. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's not always the same for every single person.
Yeah.
Now, two spirit, that identity, that's so specific. I don't think that, I'm going to start by saying, when we talk about gender and sexuality, or your society, it's two different cultures. You know what I mean? When we talk about gender and sexuality in a Western context, it is about the LGBT and all about the, gender identities and sexual identities and expressions. And I feel like Two Spirit it's in the Indigenous world. It's not the, it's adjacent, there's some similarities, but we had a much different societal structure than a Eurocentric worldview, right? Our ideas of gender roles or gender expectations were so different. So it's not that they can't exist together, it's just that I think there's a few different definitions. And for me, I'm going to start off by saying this. So Two Spirit, that definition was invented, that word, I should say, was invented in 1996, I believe, in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And that came out of a Native Indigenous Lesbian Gay Conference. And it was a word used, they were looking for a word, an English word, to describe this historical role that existed in a lot of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. So this role, maybe some people see it as a third gender, someone who's born with both that masculine and feminine spirit, Two Spirit.
Yeah.
Hence that name. And historically speaking, us Two Spirit people had a lot of different roles and responsibilities, because we had that two ways of seeing everything between that masculine and feminine. We had that ability to kind of take on either responsibility or kind of fill the gaps maybe, but also we weren't just tolerated or just they're okay, it's them, but whatever, this ignorance. In fact, we're very well respected for having that ability.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yep. That's what I heard too, is like they treated these people with such reverence because they were so gifted to have both of those spirits, those masculinity and that femininity, right? They understood that and they respected that.
So with that, the different roles and responsibilities, like in leadership or in education and, medicine and stuff. So there's a lot of different roles that Two-Spirit people felt, and a very spiritual role. And I like to say this too, to keep it separate. I feel like Two-Spirit identity is like that, a responsibility to your community. It's a job title, even as a leader, and it's something you grow into and something that you learn with. And I don't like to think that Two-Spirit just means gay or lesbian, because Two-Spirit, that role and responsibility, I've met a lot of Two-Spirit people that come in many different forms and shapes and identities across different nations. There's trans women, trans men, bisexual men and women, lesbians, gay, it's not just one of those things. It's, just having this different way of existing, but it's our responsibility to community that is what makes us Two-Spirit, our historical role, being that advocate, being that, I like to say, bridge between worlds, because we're always trying to connect those two things, masculine and feminine, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. We're always in between those things, I find.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So did you have any role models or mentors growing up? Is there somebody that you looked up to that made you feel alive, made you feel like yourself, and that encouraged you to be yourself?
Yeah, I'll name one specific. First of all, I'll say it's all the aunties that made me feel safe.
Yeah.
It always was, and this is going to lead into a conversation later, which I think we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But like I said, it was never the men that made me feel accepted in my community. And in fact, they're the ones to be the bullies or the ones to make me feel like I wasn't good enough. It was all the Native aunties and my sisters and my cousins, the women, who made me feel safe and just loved me, and from day one never judged me for who I was, and just accepted everything, and never made me feel any different, and never treated me any different than anyone else. And I think it just comes from that idea that they accepted you for who you are, and whatever you're meant to be or whatever you're brought here for, you have a space here too. So they always made me feel accepted. And my role model is, she's passed on now, but my great grandmother, she passed away when I was, I think, around 12 or 14 sounds about right. But her name was Peron. She Dene First Nations on my dad's side. And I was a young kid. I don't think I understood everything, but she was that kind of woman who just had a heart of gold and loved people regardless of where they came from, what their experience was. And she really had this love for people and acceptance for people, without question. And I think what made her so significant to me is that she taught me so much without ever having to say a thing, just leading by example. And so I always think about her. She's always on my mind. She's always this role model, and I really do idolize her, and hope to follow that same respect or have that same kind of heart that she did. She's my role model. Yeah.
Oh, and she's always with you.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so I guess let's get to it. How did you start getting into drag? Like, what piqued your interest?
Right. So many things happen at different times. There's no perfect timeline. It's like, you come out and whatever. So I remember seeing this. I talked about it just on an interview recently, a CBC. So drag, the concept of drag, it wasn't the first time I'd see because of drag. Oh, give me 1 second here. I have to ignore this. Someone's calling me here. Okay. Forgive me. Anyways, so as I was saying, growing up in Dillon, so the first time I saw drag was not because of Drag Race, it was because of my community. Which sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So every year they do a mental health week. I think it's in October, November. I never remember the month. But in the evening, there's always competitions. They did like air band, live singing, whatever, just different things every night of the week. And one of the competitions was always Mr. Beautiful and Mrs. Handsome. So that idea of what drag is started there. It was like these men wearing old prom dresses and horrible wigs. You know what I mean? And it was funny. It was funny. And I might have been maybe 9 years old, 9, 10 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No.
Okay.
So the idea of cross-dressing for entertainment, that's nothing
Yeah.
new, you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting. It opened up my mind, and I
Yeah.
don't know, I didn't really think about it until much later on. And when I was 13 years old, still living there, I remember going through the TV and seeing RuPaul's Drag Race. It was season 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just saw it for like maybe 5 minutes, and something just clicked, and I was like, oh, and then, became very quickly obsessed. So I like, from there, season 6, I started to watch all the seasons, I mean, up until this date, I'd say the American one, which is the original series. And yeah, I just felt so interested and felt like relatable to that. And I started to play with makeup, started to play with wigs. I was in drama when I left Dillon. I moved to different schools in the city throughout high school. That was Lloydminster, Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and Saskatoon. I was taking drama, and that was another way of me to express that storytelling.
Yeah.
And it didn't all come together at first. It was like all separate things, you know what I mean? But I remember the first time I did it in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, grade 10. I put on a really horrible blonde wig, very basic makeup, and a panda onesie. And Yorkton, Saskatchewan, which is arguably one of those like southern conservative little towns
Yeah.
in this province, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Grade 10, little
Yeah.
Chelazon, Leroux. I went to, it was like the week of finals, and I was having a drama final, and I thought to myself, okay, if anyone says anything, I could say it's for drama, or like, the final that we're doing. And
Yeah.
I was like, and so I did it, and it was so funny because like I went through all my classes, and like people knew, and they're like, oh my god, your makeup's so good, or people had no clue who I was. It was a weird experience, and it wasn't like good drag at all, but I mean, it was the start of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So mind you, I was still in high school, but
Yeah.
when I finally graduated, 2017, and then I moved around a bit, and then ended up in Edmonton. And there in Edmonton, or Alberta, I should say, the bar age is 18, so I could
Yeah.
finally actually go out and start performing. And so that's where I started officially, like
Yeah.
actually doing it regularly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And where would you perform? Different bars?
So there's one gay bar. It's Evolution Wonder Lounge in downtown Edmonton. It was so wild to me because like I grew up in small town northern Saskatchewan. There's no gay culture. There's nothing for two-spirit people. Nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like all I ever saw was on the internet. It was all I knew, and like YouTube and different things and things that I admired from afar for so long. And
Yeah.
I remember I was staying there with my dad, living in Edmonton with my dad, and I was just like, oh, is there a gay bar here? I Googled it and I found it, and I was just curious, and I went to their Facebook page. I saw all the events they were having, and then one of them was a season 10 viewing party. So they just like watch the episodes of Drag Race as they're airing, and people just come and chill and, relax and talk. So I was like, okay. So I got up in full drag. Not necessary, but I thought I'd do it,
Yeah.
just like, sure. So I got in drag, and then I went out there, and it was so weird. Like the best way to describe it is like walking into a whole new world. It's like Alice going down the rabbit hole. It was like I was taking steps into that underground, just like in a weird way, felt like coming to a home.
Oh yes.
And so it was interesting because it was the first time I was around a lot of other queer people.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that feeling growing up
Yeah.
in small reserve, northern Saskatchewan. And I'm so grateful because then I got to start talking to people there who I'd never met the experiences of before. Other gay men and trans women and drag artists and trans men who just, I was like learning so much just by being around it. And I finally got exposed to that world that I had only ever seen through online. Yeah.
So you felt comfortable, felt like you with your people, right?
I was with others who could understand a
Yeah.
good part of me. Not everything, not
Mhm.
everything about me, but they understood more than maybe some others did. And that made me feel safe. That made me feel like, oh, I can finally start to be everything that I wanted to be. I mean, that didn't come without its challenges. I'm not going to pretend like my life was perfect this whole time. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, I still come from that background of intergenerational traumas and, you know, my own family's experiences. It's something I don't talk about a lot with public speaking sometimes is that, well, after my parents separated when I was a teenager, I was living in an alcoholic household. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and I was very depressed as a teenager because I just didn't know where to fit in the world, and also didn't know because of the issues of intergenerational trauma and that type of emotional damage it can cause. Um, the one thing that saved me was drag because I could get ready and, you know, maybe pretend that the world is perfect for a while, or escape to a bar and leave the home and be with others that I felt safe with. And I could escape the harsh reality for a while. And
Mhm.
drag did a lot for me. I don't say this enough, and is that the reason why I have such a love for it, even during the hard times, and why I stick with it, is because at that point in my life, I was really struggling in the home and family area, and drag was something that gave me comfort, but also at times literally fed me when I had no other money. It would be like the tips that I made from performing the night before or styling a wig for someone where I had no money at all. I wasn't able to
Mhm.
find jobs really hard. And it was the thing that like kept me fed for that week.
Mhm.
And it gave me my friends, it gave me my way of living. And that's why I have such a deep dedication to it because of those times like that, you know?
Mhm. So you've always been a performer,
I think
and
so.
yeah. And how did that
Yeah.
translate into like social media and, you know, your TikTok? And I'm not sure if you what other platforms you're on other than Instagram. I don't know if you're on YouTube, but I know your TikTok certainly blew up. How did that
Mhm.
transition into that? How did you start performing, and how did you get into all of that?
Well, in high school, before I really did drag, I'd say, you know, I was kind of fooling around, but I think it was drama, like doing theater. And I always had that, again, it's just that little kid wanting to tell a story and entertain people. And I always loved it. I always had like anxiety and stuff before performing and sometimes during performing, but like it's something just felt right. And it's just something that helped me develop a way to express myself in a world that wasn't so accepting, I think.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I mean, that's kind of where I got my background from, maybe of learning how to act and act right, you know. And I always wanted to entertain people and make people laugh. I think that's
Yeah.
always just been a part of me, and um, drag is a good extension of that. It all came
Mhm.
together. All those skills that I'd been learning, it came together, and I got to really develop myself in Edmonton for a year there.
Mhm.
And like I said, that home situation wasn't very positive or stable. Really toxic, honestly.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't working out anymore, to a point where my mom had to come get me and take me all the way up to northern Saskatchewan to Fond du Lac. And I lived with my grandmother, my granny Flora, and that was summer 2019. And I was just really lost, and I was on my healing journey. It started then. It was that spring, summer. I had to look back on all the things, my family unit and everything. I stayed with my granny for a year there, and she just let me relax. She just let me, she was like, you know, there's food here, whatever, just you figure your own thing out. So I
Mhm.
used that year to really reflect on my life up to that point, 19 years of living, and the why, just why things were, you know, like
Yeah.
why is my family this way, or why is this where does behaviors come from, where are these patterns, you know. I had nothing but time to figure these things.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh, and
It's like
that's quite
it's
young
like
to be self-aware like that too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
People. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. um
No, I was
I
just
was
impressed with that because it takes some time for people to actually realize the traumas that are coming from their childhood, and you know it comes out
yeah,
in their adulthood. But you'd figured
we
that out
just
at a young age.
we repeat the patterns we're used to because it's
Yeah.
familiar and it's all we know, and I had that time to reflect on everything and cry a lot, We'd always talk about healing and it sounds so pretty. And in fact, healing from all these things is one of the hardest things can do because it really takes you to be honest with yourself and admit that a lot of things were not okay. And once you start to dig in deep, you realize like how bad things really were and accepting it and trying to give forgiveness. And it's a lot, but I had a whole year to do that. And I always like to say I was in COVID mode. I was in lockdown mode before COVID actually happened because it was a northern isolated community. There's, not a whole lot, but that my granny, staying with my granny, she was telling me all these things about that side of the family, which I never really got to know. I was always living with my dad's side of the family. And things just started piecing together. I felt confident because she would tell me about like, how all her siblings, they either owned their own business or had worked or, whether it was a local business or building the ice road, just different things. And I was like, so that's where the entrepreneurship comes from.
Yeah.
They're all leaders and they always fight and work hard for what they wanted. And I was like, I see. Whereas, some of my dad's side of the family, they like to fight and argue over, I'm like, okay, fight for what you want. But a lot of things start to make sense. It was like I was discovering this other part of myself too. And like I was saying, growing up, I always felt, even in Dillon, that as a teenager, I never felt Native enough because I have light skin, I have these green eyes, and I was made to feel ostracized not only for being gay or two-spirit, but not looking Native enough. And that I'm going to remind people too that idea of not being Native enough is a colonial perspective. That idea was brought to us so that we could eventually breed out the Native identity. You know what I mean? That concept of blood quantum, that concept of indigeneity, it was designed to get rid of the Native person and to eradicate our culture. And in fact, that idea of saying you're not Native enough is just making other people pull away from their culture, which is, I don't think, what we want, or that's not the goal we're fighting for. Anyways.
Yeah.
So I finally felt like I was connecting, and I felt confident in my background now that I understood both sides of the family, where I came from, full picture. And I'm grateful I had that because I know it's a privilege when there's a lot of other Indigenous people too who maybe 60 scoop or whatever don't know where they come from. It is so important to know where you came from in your family story. And I finally felt like I was ready to be like, I am Dene First Nations, I am Two-Spirit, I'm a drag artist, and I can speak on these things because I know what it's like now. And that's 2020 hit, the year that shut us all down. And I downloaded TikTok just a month before because I was curious. At that time, everyone was like, it's just a cringy app for kids dancing or whatever. But I was curious, and I was just really, I think at that time, focused on drag as a way. Since I didn't have a bar to perform at, all I have was TikTok and a camera and a dream. And I wasn't really talking about Native things that much, if I'm being honest. I wasn't really talking about the experience. But it was seeing content creators like Sherry McKay and Kyron Potts. I was like, like there's a space for us here. Native TikTok was finally a space where we can be each other. Just seeing those two creators, it made me feel like I had permission to be myself, be authentic, unapologetically Indigenous, I say. And I remember the first video that people are like, well, that anti-character, where does it come from? So I was like, what's a relatable Native experience? And then I was like, okay, growing up, you always see your aunties talking, about people walking by on the street. So I set up the camera, I put my hair up in a bun, and I was like saying things outside of a window, just recording myself. I was like, she just looks like her work. You know what I mean? And it didn't really pop off then, but it's where it started to develop this persona, I think. And I started to do videos that went pretty popular up north, like showing, not even just up north, when I first showed the food prices of things at the northern store there, and people were shocked to be like, oh my God, like $32 for like 12 case of Pepsi, or like $8 for a jug of milk, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
food scarcity, that really opened a lot of people's eyes. And I got onto talking about not only utilizing our humor, which was very important to me, talking about that sense of humor we have, but also educating on things like starlight tours, which were very common in experience in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, and the prairies
Yeah.
specifically. And it happens elsewhere too, but this is the experience I understood. And I was learning so much about all these different things throughout my life, and talking about MMIW experience, the residential school system. And I finally felt like I had the permission to speak on it, because I had a lived life to speak on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say it really was like sustainable. It was good, but it wasn't always consistent. So then after that summer, again, 2020, I realized I had to go do something with my life, because up north I was working a job at the little cafe there selling munchies, and I was just like, I need something else for my life. So I applied to university. I was originally going to go for education, but I missed the deadline. And then I applied for business, because I figured if I'm going to pursue this, or any career, it doesn't matter. Business classes are at least going to help me no matter what I do as a freelance artist, you know? So that summer, it happened very quickly, because schools at that time, they didn't know what COVID was going to be like, whether to accept students, all this, So I remember it was July 2020. And I was living up north, just kind of waiting around. And I swear within 2 weeks, got my acceptance letter, got my funding, applied for an apartment, got an apartment. Like it was
Oh,
like,
things just fell into place.
yes, for real. I was like, holy. And then second week in August, I was living in Saskatoon. And this is the first time I was living by myself, and as an adult, and having to be responsible for everything, right? And I was taught independence, sometimes very harshly at a very young age, but I think I had a pretty good head on my shoulders. And so I started taking business, and those courses were very helpful. It was a really hard time too. I'm not gonna lie, I was like very lonely, living alone, and
Yeah.
not sure what I was gonna do necessarily. It's just that I have to stick with this right now until something else changes. And I did learn a lot in that first year. I'm very grateful for that education. And then that fall, something just like really cool. I did this video. At that time, there was a trend going around being like, if a Mexican goes to Hogwarts, if a Russian goes to Hogwarts. I was like, if a native goes to Hogwarts. And I think that's the first time people like really, I think it went to like 100,000 views. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I was like, that's so crazy. And
would you say that was your first viral video?
yes, I would say that was.
Yeah, okay.
I would say so. That was the first viral one. And then that created a little formula for me to be like, what worked was the humor, Indigenous perspective, and putting our twist on something that's very popular, indigenizing something.
Yeah.
And I always think that's really cool. Even in any space, like in fashion, like when a beadwork artist does like a Chanel logo, or you know what I mean? Like when we take something that's in popular culture and we make it Indigenous.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how we adopted Baby Yoda and made him sacred.
Yeah. An Indigenous twist.
Yeah. So that's what worked for me. And I continue to follow that. Yeah.
That's amazing. So that's kind of how you got into TikTok. And you weren't in TikTok very long, it sounds like. Maybe 2020? Is that when you started?
2020 February is when I started.
Oh, wow.
I guess we're only in 2020. That's 3 years now. Yeah, that's a good amount of time, but yeah.
Wow. But that blew by so fast. That's amazing.
I'll say too, that journey, it was interesting because social media was like my way of, at that time, drag and anti or native comedy, completely different things. I would be in Saskatoon, I would perform locally, but the videos I made, I wasn't like in drag. I would just be like doing native humor. And I was still a student. That was my main way of living, through funding. But once in a while, I get maybe like public speaking like this, what we're doing right now. It'd be like nice to get, because to be fair, the funding I got at the time was only enough to pay for rent. For how expensive.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
so wherever I can get gigs or a little bit extra money, I needed it so I could eat and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was helpful. It was really good. And it really didn't become livable, I want to say, until the summer of 2021, like a year later. I guess that's a pretty okay time frame to be making
Oh, for
something.
sure. That's a
Yeah.
year. And then that's
Yeah.
probably when you got into, how did you get into Canada's Drag Race? Like how was that? Was there an
So
application or?
mhm.
Yeah, okay.
I want to tell the story from the start. So
Okay.
Canada's Drag Race, it was very exciting. Season
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
they announced in 2020. They
Okay.
announced, or was it 2019? No, it was 2019. I was still living in Edmonton. Okay, so 2019, they announced that they were casting for the first season of Canada's Drag Race. And this is all NDA stuff, so don't repeat it.
Okay.
um, non-disclosures. So I remember everyone was excited. Every drag queen across Canada was like, oh my God, like we're finally getting our chance. Like Americans have had it for years.
Yeah.
So I applied, I put in my tape, it's like 30 or a minute and 30 seconds. And I didn't think anything about it. I was just like, I'm just gonna put it there because like, even if they don't know who I am, put my name on their mind for the first time.
Yeah.
And in Edmonton, I'll be honest, at that community, there's a lot of ignorance around Indigenous people and some racism, to be fair. And a lot of things have changed. And there's some people who didn't like me. I don't know why necessarily. Maybe it was jealousy. I don't know. But it was so validating because I remember when I went back up north, it was literally the week after I moved back up to my granny's. I remember I got an email while I was in the process of moving up north. I was sitting with lunch with my mom in PA. And then I saw this email. I was like, oh my God. It was like scheduling a phone interview. I was like, okay, first round of casting. There's so many rounds, many rounds of casting.
Yeah.
But I was up north and I remember I took that phone call and it was just that first round and it was like they saw who I was and they saw something. But I didn't make it past that. But I remember talking to my friends and being like, yeah, no one else in Edmonton got that call. No one else. So it was so cool.
Wow.
And then season 2 auditions came around again. COVID hit, so it shifted everything. But season 2 came around, which was, when did I start applying? It would have opened November 2021, I want to say. When did I get on? No, November 2020. So it would have aired over the spring, summer, and they started auditions in the fall after I first moved to Saskatchewan.
Okay. Yep.
So I remember I started applying, and that was over the winter season. It was a lot. And I started to make a name for myself in Saskatoon as a drag performer. And I got to that first phone call. Then I got a video round portion where it's a longer video that we do. Then the next round is signing a contract, and then we had to do background checks and everything. Made it all the way up to that last step in spring. This was spring 2021, I want to say. And I was just waiting for that phone call. And then they're just like, sorry, this season you're not on. And I was like, okay. I was like, is there anything I did wrong? And I was like, wait, you know what? No, like I made it this far. Like maybe it's just not my time, right? Like you could be the best performer, but maybe it just doesn't work out. And so they're like, yeah, it's fine. I'm like, okay, cool. So 2021, nothing happened, but creators timing, that summer is when I started to make a lot more money on doing social media. So I actually got to live as a content creator. You know, I did like comedy and did like the online things and public speaking. So it was a really, really good time. It was like, okay, build the TikTok thing first and then, you know, that'll come at a different time.
Yep.
Still during COVID, the rules restrictions coming back around. Fall time 2021, applications open again. It was a long it's like a 4-month process of auditioning.
Okay.
So I remember I was getting bored of school. I was getting really sick of it because the first year I loved it. Oh my goodness, I loved it so much because I was learning so much. But then it got to things like accounting, financing, and I was just like, nothing that,
Economics.
yeah, just nothing that interests me in mathematics. And I was just like, okay, it's not,
This
and
is
I
not
was
for me.
thinking, not for me. And I just wanted to focus on this. And I remember going through it and I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how things are going to change. I'm going through all the rounds again. And then I remember January comes around and I was already kind of preparing. I was like, I got one outfit made before I even got on, just because of like, if I get on, it'll be useful. And if I don't get on, I'll still have a nice outfit.
Yeah.
And then we started the second semester of school and like, I was like, oh my God, I hate this so much.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second week of January, they're like, okay, would you like to be on? I was like, all right, let's do this. Quit school, started preparing. Goodness, it was a very stressful process too, but that's
Oh,
when we got on season
wow.
3. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
That's amazing. Well, speaking of which, season 3, Canada's Drag Race. I hope everyone watched it. I was curious, like, did you have to create your outfits before you went to the show?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I don't want to talk too much about the whole process,
Okay.
but
Okay.
so we get the different categories. It's publicly known though. We get the different like runway themes before.
Okay.
And then we have to create the idea in our head and then get someone to design it. And it's not a very long time to do all that. I don't know, maybe it was like 16 different outfits to prepare.
Oh, wow.
And we're given 4 weeks to do it.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you live in Saskatchewan, you know that there's no sequins or feathers or rhinestones anywhere. So I had to order in a lot of things, which cut like about a week and a half and 2 weeks of my
Yeah.
time. It was, oh my goodness. And I was working, doing stuff like this the whole time,
Yep.
traveling once in a while. So very hectic time. I did what I could, pulled things together, which I'm very proud of when I look back. I was like, with the money that I had, with the time that I had, with what was available to me, because in Saskatoon, I had one friend who could sew at that level or could be able to create costumes like that.
Mhm.
And I had no one else that could really do that or really make something drag race worthy, you know?
Right.
So it was a very stressful time, but I mean, I'm really proud. Looking back now, it's been 1 year since that whole process happened. I'm like, well, you know, I'm very proud of what we did. And
Yeah.
then we filmed last spring, and then we didn't know about anything for a while, and then it aired in It was announced in June and it aired in July last year. So, you know, we were just like waiting, didn't know what was going to happen, and that's when season 3 started. That's when you saw Auntie appear on that stage.
Yeah, I seen the previews and I'm like, oh my God, she's from Saskatchewan. I was so excited for it. I was so excited.
First contestant from Saskatchewan.
Yes, that's
Ever.
amazing. Well, we're all so proud of you. You know, you really paved the way for Saskatchewan and Two-Spirit and Indigenous. Like, that is amazing. In the show, what was who did you get close to? Did you have any friends on the show?
Yeah, so there's actually a few that I got really close to in that time. Giselle Lullaby. They didn't show a lot of, we worked
Oh, yeah.
together, but she
Yeah.
made, oh my goodness, when I
She
first
was so
got there,
funny. She was
she
so funny though.
is funny. And okay, so here's the funny thing. I always grew up with the idea that French Canadians were like rude or whatever.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's so funny because the two of them there, like they were the first to make me feel comfortable and made me laugh.
Yeah.
So like they became really close friends. And like Giselle, I remember I walked in the first day, I'm like, I don't know anyone. I've never met anyone here. I'm like, all these other girls know each other, and I'm like nervous. And then she was so freaking funny, just doing stupid things. And you know, when we can laugh, we can relax and feel comfortable. And she did that for me. So it was really cool getting to see her. And then Lady Boom Boom, who's a great artist. And I finally got to see them after 1 year ago, you know, in DragCon LA, because we all work in different cities and everything. So
Yep. And how was that?
That was magical. That was like crazy hectic, no sleep. You fly, you go in, you set up, you work those 2 days. There's no time, but it's really special. It's really special because everyone just comes together and celebrates that time and the art and, you know, our community and different people. I had people from the States, native people from there, from Arizona, New Mexico. They came to LA to just meet me and talk about their experience, and that it hit them, and I was like, oh wow, like again, I'm just some little kid from northern Saskatchewan, and what I did meant something to someone across the border. It was special. um yeah, and so that was a really magical thing, and it meant a lot to me, and I had a lot of fun. It was tiring, long days, but it's really cool. And another friend that I was really close to on the show is Chaos from originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Two Spirit Métis. And that's someone that everyone saw on TV. Like, our relationship was very relevant on those episodes.
Mm-hmm.
That conversation, I knew it was going to mean a lot to people. Again, talking about identity, feeling like you're, I don't want to say like a fraud, but imposter syndrome. Feels like, oh, I'm not meant to be here, or I'm not Native enough. We talked about that. And I think what it really got down to was like, you know what, even in people who were born and raised on reserve, or whatever experience it comes from, 60 scoop, people who are closer to culture, there's always that identity of imposter syndrome, I think, because maybe we're made to feel like we're not enough, or that we don't know enough, or we're not Native enough. And then, Chaos was raised like, well, because I have light skin, I have green eyes. I'm like, look at me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized your culture, your identity is not just about your skin color or the color of your eyes. It's not about the way you look. It's about the people you were raised up around, and the lessons that you were taught, and the community that brought you up and educated you. That's what identity is about. It's not about all these other things that are external.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's when you said that was one of the conversations that would be featured, I guess. Speaking of which, there must have been a lot of other conversations that were probably had behind the scenes, I'm sure. Did you have any negative experience as well on the show?
The lack of sleep. Oh my goodness. But I'm not a morning person to begin with.
Yeah.
But we'd wake up at 5 a.m. and we wouldn't get back home until like 11:30, 12 at night. So it was long days. It was like 16-hour days.
Oh, wow.
So that was I think what bothered me, I want to talk about that negative experience. What bothered me was not that anyone was outwardly racist, but the ignorance baffled me, because a lot of what I had to bring in my story, and even in my looks, if you watch the show, you see that every episode I tried to incorporate some piece of our culture or our experience in the fashion. So when I walked in, the Stay Deadly hoodie, which, by the way, a bunny hug in the prairies, you know what I mean? Stay Deadly.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then that design challenge, I wore a dress. I made a dress that said "F around, find out." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they didn't understand it. It went over their heads. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then in the second episode, the runway thing was about ancient goddesses. I did Sky Woman and told that story.
Yes.
And it sounded like they never heard about it. And mind you, that's in Ontario. That side of the country where that story comes from. And they live there, they grew up there, everyone there, and it sounds like they had never heard it before. And even in the last episode there, before I went home, I wore that Two Spirit to me regalia. I used ribbons as the main feature. It was a sleeves runway. And for us, ribbons are a history of trade and the Canadian economy, why Canada even exists in the first place, which is the fur trade. And then, we got the metal goods and the ribbons and beadwork that weren't, available here. Those are results of trade. And because of that trade relationship, ribbons are incorporated into regalia, which it's not a written history, by the way. No one really talks about it, but it's like, we didn't have synthetic fabric, colorful ribbons before that trade existed. But so that outfit represented that historical trade, and the two colors, the blue and the lavender there, that I want to signify the meaning of Two Spirit identity, because in regalia, every color has a meaning to it. And so I want to represent that. But so having all of that, I think what it showed me, what disappointed me the most, was that a lot of Canadians watching it, it went over their heads and they didn't understand it. And I think I was more disappointed by the lack of awareness about what it was. And I thought there were very basic things, but
Mhm.
maybe it's grew up here in, you know, Saskatchewan that we take it for granted. But I thought at least a joke, a native joke, or ribbons and regalia, or, you know, Sky Woman, that something would have been understood, but it really didn't. That's what was disappointing for me. And it showed me there was a lot more work and education to be done.
Mm. Well, I thought you did a great job with educating the audience about, you know, your outfits, the ribbon, you know, that gave you an opportunity to share that knowledge and share that history. I thought it was great. I really did.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're about 7:56. We have about a half an hour. We'll say about 25 minutes here. I have a few more questions, but if people want to start asking some questions, if you guys want to put it in the chat, if there's something that's, you know, you have any burning questions you want to ask Chelazon, feel free. We'll take a look at the chat group here and take some questions up. Another question that I have is, what's the best comments you've ever received as a social media influencer on any platform, TikTok, Instagram?
The comments that make me feel, and it's not even just in social media, sometimes when people meet me in person, right? Anytime I hear someone, you know, again, after we filmed the show, I didn't know how they're going to cut it up and edit it, but I felt really sad and disappointed because I was just like, did I do the right thing? Did I say the right things? Am I representing my people correctly? Because you don't know what they're going to show. You really don't. They could edit it all out for all that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure, and I felt really like, did I do my people proud? You know, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure because I didn't know what was going to happen. But at that time, I think I felt defeated, and why I cried is because I'm like, am I not doing enough on the show? Or it was like, it to me, it was like, no matter how hard I try to explain it, it doesn't matter to them. And I realized I was trying to prove myself or appeal myself to a group of people that didn't understand us. And that's what I was focusing on, when really I should have been thinking about that little Native kid back home, you know, that little two-spirit boy growing up in a small community who doesn't know where they fit in. I should have been thinking about them, you know, and it wasn't until the show aired and people started reaching out to me, and even at DragCon, right? People were just like, yeah, I felt connected. It was so authentic. That humor, the way you talked about it, I was like, that's home. And anytime I get to feel like I made someone feel comfortable and feel like they're at home, or even in TikTok, why it was so cool is because we found a home online for the first time, and it was respected. So it's always special when I can just make someone be like, you know, how when I was saying watching Drag Race for the first time, I was like, that makes sense. If I could just see that some little two-spirit kid growing up in northern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, whatever, is like, there's someone like that out there and you talk about representation too. Why representation is so important is for our mental health and seeing ourselves in someone. If we can see someone like us succeeding, it shows us that it's possible and we have a better outlook on the future. Because I remember my representation growing up, I'm sure you know this too. Back when I was a little kid, the only time I saw Native people on news was talking about missing and murdered. And it was always negatively explained, saying, adding all these labels like sex worker or alcoholic, all those things, that was representation in the media. And the only time I remember, I don't know if anyone's gonna remember this, but when we go into Walmart, beside the washrooms, there was always a poster board, and there was always photos of missing people. And majority of it was always Native girls.
Yeah.
And that was my representation of what Native people were. That's what I was taught that we were supposed to be. And it wasn't until season 1 of Canada's Drag Race, I saw Alona Verley, who's from BC. And I was like, it took until 2020 to see a two-spirit person on TV.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, I can do it too. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It shows everyone else that it's possible.
Yeah.
And so that's what's so special about it. And if I can do that for someone and maybe give them a little hope that there's a place in this world for them, that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. You're inspiring others. So I see the chat box is blowing up here. So I'm just going to read some of the questions here.
All the burning questions for Auntie.
Yeah,
over here.
all the burning questions here. Okay, so we have a question from Cheryl. Where do you want to be or be doing 10 years from now? Do you see yourself continuing to do drag and be an influencer on social media in 10 years?
I try to look at all of what I love to do and what is the common denominator, or the thing that's relevant through all of those things that I do. And it's storytelling. And that's something our people have done for generations. It's a way we pass down our knowledge and share our experiences and lessons. Everything is through stories. And so, you know what, maybe someday my body's not going to want to put on those heels. I don't know, maybe I'll break my foot walking onto a stage. Who knows? My goals and my dreams, I love, no matter what format it's in, whether it's lip syncing to a song or, you know, doing stand-up comedy, which is something I'm really working on right now to develop a set and make a tour happen. I'm in the process of doing that. That's something I really want to focus on and do a drag experience. So hopefully I get to see everyone here, attend that in the future, ideally the fall, if everything works out. But I can see myself in creating a story through film, or creating stories through documentaries, or it's just different ways, different forms of art.
Yeah.
And explaining our experiences. TikTok is one medium. You know, doing drag on a stage is another. Telling jokes through a comedy show is another way. And I love just storytelling. And I want to be able to create a documentary on, well, what is it to be two-spirit? What does that mean? Because a lot of people have a lot of questions around that, right? They still, there's people who lived it, who've grown up around it, and then there's people who have no idea what it is. And I think we're in a growing stage right now. And
yeah,
still not everyone has even heard the word. I think people have heard the word, but maybe they don't understand everything that it means. So I'd like to be able to do things like that, and even be an actor, or be a storyteller like I was, you know, grade 10, performing and acting.
That's definitely your calling, and you'll make your spirit very happy if you follow that. Okay, another question from Janelle. I am just wondering how, as a non-Indigenous person who works with youth who have lived a similar upbringing to yourself and now live in care, brackets, I work for a group living home in Regina. How can we best support them in their healing journeys? What was something you wish someone would have done for you? You are a true inspiration to so many kids, and they want me to tell you that you have shown them they are safe to be them. Thank you. Oh, so the question again is, how best can we support them in their healing journeys, and what was something you wish someone would have done for you?
Right. So, I'm going to speak. You know what? I'm not a mental health professional. I just have my lived experience, right? So I'll start with saying that I'm not qualified, medically speaking, or, you know, I don't have that training, but I can speak from my own experience and my own mental health and my healing journey. And like I said, those aunties, why did I feel safe with them? Why did I feel okay being myself around them? Is because they never made me feel any different. They never made me feel like I was an outsider. They never treated me any different than the next kid. They just talked with me and laughed with me and shared food with me in the same way as everyone else. They never judged me. They just loved me for who I was. Did they understand everything about LGBT, two-spirit, queer history? No, they didn't. But the reason why I felt so safe to be around them is because they just had that openness to love and maybe learn from me. Maybe I did teach them something at the end of the day. And, you know, they didn't have to give me the world. They just had to share the love from them. And I'm always so grateful for them because they taught me all these lessons. Indigenous women specifically just have so much. As soon as you're born a Native woman, the world is already tough for you. But the fact that these women had all of that hardship and still had the ability to laugh and smile and tell a joke and love someone, that's what inspires me. But going back to that, what I wish someone would have done for me. And I think there's certain family members that were very judgmental of who I was and didn't like who I was. And in fact, speaking on it, talking about how my life's not perfect, didn't ever acknowledge, they ignored the fact that I did drag until I got on TV. They never once, they had so many opportunities, come see me perform, so many opportunities, come say hi, come watch a show, come take a photo. It was not a thing until I was on Canada's Drag Race and I went back to my home community. Oh my God, I love you. It's so good to see you. Let's take a photo. Only then. And I'm not going to blame them for that. I get it. There isn't a time where family and public shame were tied so close together. I understand that. Don't want to bring shame to your family. And in their heads, I was shameful until it was proven that I was successful. Then they're like, oh, you're not shameful. You're actually very good for us. You know what I mean? So I see it. So I wish that was the thing. I wish they would have, like some other women in my family, just accepted me from day one. And that's what I wish I would have had. And really, it's people ask us all the time, how can we help? How can we be better allies? Listen, have an open heart, do your best to learn. And if you make a mistake, because inevitably we're all going to make a mistake, no matter how hard you try, we're all going to mess up somehow. It's to have the accountability to learn and to be able to grow as a person, because we all made mistakes to get to this point. But if you have, that love and that strength to be like, all right, I messed up, I understand, I learned something, and I'm going to do better from now on. That's all that matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another question here from Preston. Did you have any alternative entrance lines for Drag Race?
No.
No,
I said if I ever got on Drag Race, okay, so in that Native Goes to Hogwarts video, my first one, I was like, the first thing is like Hogwarts fancy building or whatever, that it was like a Native uncle character, like, oh yes, it's nice in here. I wonder who paid for all this. Better not be chief and council. As soon as I said that on that video like 2 years ago, I was like, if I ever get on Drag Race, that's what I'm gonna walk.
That's what I'm gonna say.
There was no other option. There was no other option.
Oh my God, that is so funny. I couldn't believe you said that.
It made a lot of people laugh. I remember someone shared it onto Facebook and it got like 100,000 views or whatever. I was like, holy.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. But back to what you were saying earlier about how, you felt that, your jokes were going over everybody's head. I'm sure that wasn't the case for a lot of Native communities though. I'm sure everybody was like, laughing their butts off, like understanding and getting the joke, right?
I'm happy that people, I think it was so special because it was like, even in our own media or whatever, there's not many Native references or Native things. Like we have smoke signals, you know what I mean? And in terms of media, you look at every other POC group, and they have representation in Hollywood and films and movies and TV. We as Native people are so far behind in our representation. And I think maybe it was so powerful. I'm not the first Native person to end up on TV, but in terms of like, maybe the humor, maybe the way I said it, or maybe it was just so relevant. It hit home for a lot of people. And I'm glad that it did.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I knew something was going to come up about this. So Andrian, we have a question here from CG. He says, I saw your post about Andrian today. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? He's lovely.
Okay, so for those who aren't aware, which I'm pretty sure everyone here might be, because it's like the main conversation of Native TikTok right now.
Lately,
but I'll just try to briefly recap. So recently he's been getting criticism for, people are accusing him of fetishizing Native women and got mad at him for not posting on MMIW Day. And so that's the main criticisms. And I had to post something
Yeah.
because this is just the explosion of everything right now. But I had seen it from when it started to develop, like from that first day. Like I said, we on the video we met during First Nations University powwow, which was a month ago now, a month and a half.
Yeah.
I can't remember. And like I said, I had seen one of his videos before, but I didn't really pay attention. It's just like
Yeah.
someone that I was like, oh, he's here, cool. So I remember we got introduced and we just started to talk, and I just started telling him the way I'm talking to you right now, telling him about my life, my lived experience, like all of that. And you know, I remember seeing some comments in this video being like, oh, you're gonna snag an auntie. It's all these Native men teasing him, right?
Yeah.
And I remember talking to him, and he so innocent, so naive, like he was just like, what's an auntie? He's like, oh, well, in our culture, like I said, it's not about blood relations. It's just someone who raised you, educated you, made you feel whatever. And then he was like, oh yeah, because people are saying I'm gonna meet an auntie or whatever. No clue. He had
Yeah,
no
I know. And he was so young.
All these people are just teasing him. I'm like, oh my goodness. And I didn't tell him at that moment because everyone was around. I didn't want to, you know, embarrass him or anything publicly. So you know, when we went to go have dinner later, I was explaining, I was like, so do you know what snagging means? And he's like, no. And then I explained what we know what snagging means. And like his jaw just dropped and he was so shocked. He's like, so this is what people are saying, that I'm gonna sleep with these aunties or whatever? I was just like, yeah, that's what they're like teasing you. They're saying that this is. And then another one of his videos went viral too, where like he folded the bannock taco in half and it was just like mind blown. Like, you're right.
You taco like that. I didn't know.
Yeah, I was like, he was trying to be all bougie with a fork and knife over here, and I'm like, that makes so much more sense.
It does. It does. I never realized you could actually eat taco like that. Now I'm gonna try that next time.
But if you think about it, like tacos, they're folded anyways. Like I don't know. Anyways, we didn't think.
Why didn't we think of that?
But then there'd be like Native men duetting him and being like, "Oh yeah, holy, you're folding that bannock like you're gonna fold an auntie," like all of that, right? And he had no clue. And then I remember when I was talking about it, I was just like, you know what? It is funny. It is part of our humor. I think it's okay to know what it means and to explain. And now that he's in on the joke, right? Like he's aware he's being teased and stuff, and he started making videos about it. Like it's funny, but a lot of people took offense to it. Because they thought it was like fetishizing Native women. They thought that it was like, especially because he didn't post on MMIW Day. But my main thing, and I remember just seeing videos criticizing him. And my first thing is, one, they didn't see everything that had happened, right? And from what I saw, it was all these Native men teasing him. And it reminded me of when I was a kid, and I didn't like that either. Maybe it just brought up some old feelings about that. And, you know, and now that he's aware of it, and all of a sudden they're getting mad. Like, I just didn't understand it, because now that he's in on the joke and they can't tease him about it, and he's aware of it and he's making that same humor, it's like people are getting offended. And to me, I'm sorry to say this, I don't think it's a fetishization or it's sexualizing Indigenous women when, you know, he wasn't talking in a derogatory way. I don't think I've seen any video where he's been sexualizing the idea, or, you know what I mean? It was all in like humor. And in fact, if you look back at it, it was these Native men that were perpetrating that idea of sexualizing Native women. It was like they were offering that up, being like, oh, sexualize Native women. I'm sorry to say that that's the truth. And, you know, we have to be accountable too. So who made that joke or humor okay with in the first place? Who is accountable? And you know what? It was the Native men who sexualized the idea of Native women. I'm sorry to say that's my perspective. And, you know, coming in on that joke, I don't think he was saying anything particularly dirty or sexualized about Native women. I don't like, wasn't saying like talking about the woman's body or talking about what he was going to do to it. It was like, oh, all the aunties are mine. Haha. You know what I mean? Like, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah. And then they were like using that humor, right? And he was just joining in. Right. And then some people just took it the wrong way. And you know.
And again, they're talking. Then other criticism too is talking about not posting on MMIW Day. First of all, I will say this: I
Yeah.
didn't post either. I don't feel that one, I'm the right person to talk about it. I'm aware of it. I'm learning every day about it, but I don't have any family that I know of that has had that experience. I don't have that experience personally. I don't feel like I'm the expert here. So why would I talk about someone or try to act like I know about this thing or try to act like I'm the expert? Because there are other people more qualified in that field of knowledge and in that lived experience that are better to speak on it because they're the ones that are impacted.
Right.
You know what I mean? And this comes back to my final point, which is that I think it's unfair that people are putting this huge expectation on someone who, one, just moved to Canada 1 year ago and is just learning about our culture and our experience. And, it took me 23 years to be able to talk this way and educate other people. It took me that long to feel confident. Yeah. And even still, I know I'm not the expert to talk on every single thing. And the comments I've been seeing today, which a few things stood up, which is like, it was almost like they're setting him up to fail. I agree with that. You know what I mean? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And then another thing that I saw was like, he's not our savior. Yeah. He's not this person that's going to come in and fix everything for us. He's 19 years old.
Yeah.
Are we really going to, and there's other criticisms from other Native TikTokers that have a platform that were saying like, oh, well, he should be doing advocacy work. And if you think about it, advocacy, it has to come from a place of experience and knowledge and years of knowledge. I explain it like, do you think a student would be the best teacher? No. Someone who is just learning. I mean, like, well, I tell you how to do things once. Are you going to be the master at it? I don't think so. It's unfair pressure. I mean, after 23 years of lived experience, I can speak on these things, but someone who's just coming to understand it in their first year, that's immense pressure. And in fact, unrealistic. He's not going to be the one to perfectly speak on everything. And then also now, because of that heavy criticism, it's like, I think he's afraid to mess up or say the wrong thing. When we're supposed to make mistakes so we can learn and become better. Yeah. And it's interesting because it's that type of like lateral violence or that type of, it's our own trauma too. I get it. I understand that we see someone who's succeeding and we see someone who's sharing this culture, you know what I mean? And and it does suck because maybe if I was in that mindset, I would be like, well, why can't I do that? Why can't I do this thing and become just as successful? And what I have to say to that is it's possible. Look at me, like one of the criticisms that I saw on this one TikToker's post, it was just like, well, there's actual Two-Spirit people and women doing the work and they don't get the opportunities that he is. I'm like, that's not true because I'm here. Yeah. And you know what I mean? Just because it's not millions of views across social media doesn't mean you don't get those same opportunities to speak in a public workshop or in education or in your institution or in your group meeting. You have every opportunity. The only difference is someone decided to take it and make that an. That is the only difference. Like I said, grew up in Northern Saskatchewan, I had every opportunity, or the world, it was built for us to fail, as Indigenous people. But taking every opportunity and making it possible for yourself, you know what I mean? That's just what he did. You know what I mean? And it's interesting because the way people are saying is like he's capitalizing and gaining off our experience. And it's like, he's sharing his experience of learning about our culture. And what I compared it to today was like, so if you go on a trip to Mexico and you start to record all the beautiful culture and it goes viral, does that mean you're capitalizing and profiting off of them? It's just sharing a beautiful culture and learning about it and engaging with it.
Yeah. And I know he was sincere. And just speaking with him, you could tell he's very sensitive and a very emotional person as well. Like he's just, honestly. So it made me really sad to see the negative comments coming at him. I wasn't expecting that, but then again, I wasn't surprised either though, too.
To me,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, to me, I'll say this is that something I had to realize is, they're like, well, why aren't you educating? I'm like, we are. believe it or not, things happen offline. Some things aren't always posted on TikTok. Because like you were there, right? Like the whole time we were just talking about what it is to be Indigenous, all these different lessons. There's also a history, people don't know this, and people are saying this, like people in the States, natives in the States were kind of getting this misinterpreted, is that something that is unique to Canada is the relationship between Indigenous people and Ukrainian settlers. There's a long-standing connection between us, because if you look at we have those Cookham scarves is what I call it, the ones with the floral patterns. That is not based off of our creation. That is Ukrainian culture, that although Ukrainian grandmothers wear that. And again, that's a history of trade and relationship we have there.
Absolutely.
So our sharing of cultures between Indigenous and Ukrainian is not new, especially in Saskatchewan. It is not new. It's something that's been going on, since the 1900s, even before that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's just very interesting that there's a lot of criticism, and it to me, it seems to come out of a place of envy sometimes.
Yeah, and that's probably what it is too.
Mhm.
Speaking of Andrian, he's going to be our next guest speaker. So he's going to be on Decolonize YQR. We are going to be talking to him about his experience, I guess, as a new Canadian, learning about the Indigenous culture and history, and as well as his experience going to the powwow and kind of how that was all about. So we're excited to have him. That's going to be June 13th. So just a little plug there.
Yeah. I think it's cool though. I think
to get his perspective on it as well. Yeah.
I think what was so interesting, or why it's so phenomenal, like why does this exist? It's like, well, we have an outsider who's not even Canadian born show more interest in us than any other Canadian born citizen has. And there's this saying in show business is that all press is good press. Regardless if it's viewed as negative, whether it's like people are getting mad, whatever intentions, he is well intentioned. But like, believe it or not, whatever your perspective is on this, all of us having this conversation right now is making us more visible. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And bringing up these conversations that we need to have for our own healing, for non-Indigenous people to see us, and we've been fighting for this for so long, this representation, this connection to be understood. And I think now that it's happening, there's a lot of these feelings coming up, and I don't think it's right to maybe criticize an outsider who's wanting to learn about it or try to shove them out. I don't think that's okay. Everyone has different teachings. I'm aware of that. Everyone has a different perspective. But I think there's a lot more good into explaining and someone who's willing to listen. Hearing stories, they're allowed to learn it's not the first time either. How many non-Indigenous people have been like, oh yeah, I just sat with an elder for like 4 hours and I learned so much and I cried and I understood things finally. So it's not a new thing that we've been doing, you know what I mean? And it's just interesting because it surfaces a lot of those traumas, and that's what we're seeing. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have time for a couple more questions. I think we're sitting about 8:23 here. So Aaron is asking, who are some of the drag artists that you respect or admire locally, as well as RPDR?
RuPaul's Drag Race. Let's see. Yeah. So locally, I live in Saskatoon right now. I plan to move at the end of summer just because I need something new. I lived here for 3 years. I love it. I have such a love for Saskatoon. I'm so proud of my
community. It's beautiful
to see how much it's grown. So some artists that I really love, some really close friends of mine who've seen all of this along the way since I moved there, right? There's a queen named Mia Beretta, this trans woman who's the best host. Do a laugh. She's freaking funny. Ivana Beer, who is this woman who does drag and very funny, very close friend of mine. We worked a lot together. Roxy Roller, Métis Two Spirit, amazing dancer. Maxim Noise, drag king, First Nations as well, and is a wonderful singer. There's so much great artists in that city. I'm just gonna name drop all. Amy Grant, Karma Kay, oh my God, now I can't remember. Shanali. There's so much good representation. I remember, so when I first moved to Saskatoon, fun story, there was not a lot of drag, really. It was something that happened every so often, especially when it's COVID, there's not much, but it would be the same 8 people every time. It would be me, Karma, Satsali, Amy Grant, like the same cast over and over, because there was not enough artists doing it. And I remember the last time I did a count of every artist that performed in Saskatoon, maybe 3 months ago, there was 50 performers. So it's like, it's growing, and now there's like a whole generation of people. I knew it was kind of crazy, because I remember I came back from one of my work trips, and then there had somebody come up being like, yeah, can I be a part of your show, or like this thing? And I'm like, who are you? They're like, and then they introduced themselves, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen you before, but you know what I mean? That's when I was like,
Yeah.
oh, really? They're really popping out now.
Yeah.
So, mhm.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Another question here, Chelazon, and this is from Colleen. So, Chelazon, so enjoy hearing your story. You were so wise and introspective for someone so young. My question, are you getting tired of being asked about your experience on the show when you are clearly so much more than one experience? Or that one experience?
Well, that one experience is tied to everything else in my life. So it's not like I get bored, you know what I mean? Like, I talk about the Indigenous experience, and when I get to talk about it like this, like the way we talk about this is a lot of what I do, and going to different communities and different educational institutions to talk about this, and in different ways, different contexts. So, and I talk about something a little different every time, and I get to learn something from those places as well. And so it's, even if it's the same, technically it's the same content. We always go through my early life, we always talk about Drag Race, we always talk about TikTok. Though it is the same content, it changes every time, no matter what. And I learn something new from them, or I talk about it in a different way. If I'm talking to a group of adults, it's very different than talking to a young group of kids. You know, maybe they want to focus on social media more, or you know, how do you start? Whereas adults might be like, well, what was it like going through your healing process? How did you deal with that? You know, like different interests. And so it's never the same thing for me when I get to talk about it, which I'm happy about.
Awesome. Well, that's good. So we could probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. So if you had no limits, what is one thing you would like to do for your community?
Oh my goodness. I think first and foremost, create, because I know I would have loved this, create like maybe a grant or something for artists to explore, or have like a weekend workshop, the same way they did a mental health awareness week, to be able to bring like great artists or friends, whether it's like a songwriter, a makeup artist, or a painter, or something, to have one weekend of workshop of creativity, because there's not enough opportunity for people on reserve, because I went to school on reserve and in school 50 different times in my life. So there's not enough opportunity to create that for our own people. I know that, but there's all the money in the world for sports. There's all the money in the world for FSIN and Sports Week, where we can pour thousands and thousands of dollars to volleyball and hockey, which is great. That is great. That is amazing. But I don't understand why we don't value our storytellers. We don't. And education and sports, yes, great things. But there's other people like me who are looking. I know FSIN also did like a science fair type of thing, where you presented a project, study, and all that. That was really cool for me, because I was more of a nerd as a kid, you know what I mean? But I don't think there's enough funding towards the creatives, you know what I mean? To those who express themselves in a creative way. I would love if I could provide that for my community, even if it was as small as bringing like a drag show, or you know, creative workshops for the songwriters, for you know, painting and different types of artistry, because I was that artist. And it's a weird behavior. They're like, oh, it's not possible, you could never. Well, I did. So if I had those opportunities handed to me, not handed to me, if I was offered those small opportunities to grow as an artist and take initiative, I think I would have gotten here a lot sooner. Maybe it wouldn't have been the right time with where I was at in my healing journey, but I think I would have felt a lot more prepared. Maybe I would have had a lot more training. Maybe I would have had a lot more confidence at certain points. So I know there's so much Native talent that is undiscovered and is unable to grow because we don't feed and nourish it enough.
Yeah, the arts. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
sorry, to be fair too, though, it's like they talk about, oh, like to become famous as an artist or whatever. People undervalue art so much.
I
It's
know.
weird
I know.
because
Yeah.
education and sports are like the priority. But if you
Yeah.
think about it, education, everyone comes into a field of whether you're working in mental health or medicine, all these different things. And in sports, it's great, but I don't know how many Native sports stars there are. It's not to be rude or shady, but it's like also if you think about artistry, art as a creative person, there's many different fields. Believe it or not, even in sports. Who do you think created that graphic for the NHL? Who do you think created those graphics for the titles that all the stats and scores go by? Who made those things look pretty?
Mm-hmm.
It was artists.
Yep.
Who
Yep.
designed that hockey stick to, be correct mathematically and visually? Who created those logos for those brands? Who came up with the campaign branding for a team? All of those things are because of creative people and artists. We undervalue it so much. And it's like the earrings you're wearing, the lashes, the painting behind you, all because of artists.
Yes.
And it's weird how we as a society don't value it as much when it's all around us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So unfortunately, we couldn't get through all the questions. I think we just had a few more here, but it is 8:31, and we are very, very happy to have had this conversation with you, Chelazon. We thank you for coming on the show. We hope to maybe feature you again someday. See where you are in your 10-year journey, 10-year plan.
Yeah.
One question though. They say, when are you coming to perform in Regina? Is there a plan for that at all?
Not that I know of. Actually, you know what? Here's the thing. I would love to go everywhere across Canada. This is how it works for us as performers and entertainers. We get contracted by local organizations, by bars, and by different groups and companies. So I would love to go everywhere, but it's a matter of like this, an organization deciding that they want me and bringing me in, reaching out to my agent and negotiating and having a set time and schedule where I can come in. So if it was up to me, I would be everywhere. But it is up to organizations and bars. So if you work for an organization, whether it's for education like this, the reason I'm brought in here is to talk about my lived experience, education to spirit, Indigenous education. I also have been brought into different venues to perform as a drag artist. So many different things that we do. So if you work with an organization, or maybe the bar owners in Regina, the best way to make it happen is to reach out to them and talk and show genuine interest. Because if there's enough people that do that, it lets them know that like, oh, there will be enough people to fill a room. So there's no risk, let's bring them in. So that's kind of how that whole economy inside of things works. So I'd love to be in Regina, no plans currently, but if you would like to make it happen, those are little ways that it's possible. Yeah.
And I think Courtney put your agent's email in the chat group here, Lavender Promotions.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Lawrence at Lavender Promotions. Yep.
But yes, so before we go, we are asking everyone if they could fill out the survey. Courtney, I think if you want to put the survey in there again. Yeah, just so it's at the end there. So this is just a short evaluation that we would like you to take. It probably take you 1 to 2 minutes. And it's just providing us some feedback on the topics and the speakers that we're bringing on for Decolonize YQR. If you enjoyed the show tonight and you would like to see more of this, I'll send you this. If you missed the link tonight, I can send an email later here with the link. But I just want to say thank you again to Chelazon. I thought it was a great presentation. I really enjoyed the dialogue, and we really learned a lot from you, and I hope everybody else did. I learned a lot, and stay deadly.
Stay deadly. Thank you. All right. Well, I have to go run and get some food here. Small towns, things close real early, so
you betcha.
I'm gonna go do that. But thank you so much for listening, Marcicho. I appreciate it all so much, and I hope to see you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.